crossed paths with a guy by the name of Michael Ferris. Is there anybody in here that knows the name Mike Ferris? If you homeschooled your kids, then you owe Michael Ferris a debt of gratitude. If you know anybody who homeschooled their kids. In the 1970s, homeschooling your kids, by the way, was illegal in all 50 states in one form or another. It's hard to imagine that now. Fundamental right of parents to decide how their kids were educated have been taken over by the federal government. Ferris was a young attorney, decided that was wrong, and he decided to fix it, and he did. And that's why it's legal today. And Ferris came to me and he said this, Mark, are you satisfied with what you're accomplishing in politics? The answer was self-evident. It was no, I wasn't satisfied. And he said there's a reason. Because what you're trying to do is put good people in Washington, D.C., and it does not matter how many people you put in Washington, D.C. You can have 60 good senators. You can have 70 good senators. You can have 120, 130, 150, 300 good members in the House of Representatives, and you will not get the governance you want because we have a broken structure in America. We do not have a personnel problem in Washington, D.C. We have a structure problem in Washington, D.C. And this is how he explained it to me. He said, let me explain to you some of the major structural flaws that have been introduced into our system of governance. For example, and Marcia mentioned this, we have the 17th Amendment. The 17th Amendment provided for the direct election of senators. You guys get to vote for your senators here in this. You may not get who you vote for, but you get to vote for your senators here in the state. Same in California. Well, it wasn't intended to be that way. The founders set it up so that the state legislatures appointed their own senators. And the people didn't have a vote. The House was the people's house, and the senators actually represented state government in Washington, D.C. That was changed with the 17th Amendment. So what did that break? I want you to think about the incentive of a senator who works for the state legislature versus the incentive of a senator who works for the people. So a senator who now works for the federal government, is paid by the federal government. Are they more powerful or less powerful if there's more power in Washington, D.C.? More powerful, right? Their power is in Washington. Your senator's power is not here in New York. They don't have any power in New York. Their power is in Washington, D.C. Human beings naturally, by our nature, we accrete power to ourselves. We want more power. So they are now incentivized to draw power to themselves in Washington, D.C. It's just human nature. It doesn't make them bad people. The idea that the federal government should have less power and the state government should have more power is anathema to what it means to be a senator. It broke the balance. Here's another example of why the 17th Amendment broke the balance. Anybody ever hear of an unfunded mandate? It's where the federal government says, hey, New York, you're going to do this. We're going to tell you how you do it. It's going to cost you a whole bunch of money, and we're going to give you no money, and we're going to give you no input on how it gets done. That does not sound like a very good deal, does it? Right? So imagine now, your senators, by the way, vote for unfunded mandates all the time. They like them. Why do they like them? Because Washington, D.C., meaning them, get to tell you here at home what to do and how to do it and how to spend your money, your tax dollars, New York tax dollars. Right? So that's how it works. Now imagine if they work for the state legislature. Imagine a senator coming home from Washington, D.C. and going to his state legislator that he's accountable to and standing in front of that legislature and saying, I have great news. I just voted on your behalf to make you spend all kinds of money over which you have absolutely no authority, but you'll have to tax your own citizens to raise that. Right? The legislature would say, you're fired. We're going to send somebody else. The Senate was designed for a particular purpose in the United States of America. It's a really simple job. Senators were meant to say one word a lot in Washington, D.C., and that word was no. That's it. The federal government was going to say, we want to do this, and the Senate would say, no, you can't. That's for the states. But we want to spend money on that? No, you can't. The states say you can't. We want this power? No, you can't have that. That's what the Senate was designed to do. So when we passed the 17th Amendment, we broke that balance. Let me give you another example. The federal government has its hands in everything, right? They decide how your car should run, what kind of gasoline you put in your car. They decide about your water systems. They decide the way this building is built and what a lot of the codes are. They decide what toilets you can put in your house, right? It's outrageous. They're involved in everything. Where is it in the Constitution that it says the federal government can tell me what kind of toilet to put in my house? So where does that power come from? Where did the federal government get that power? They got that power under the Commerce Clause. Commerce Clause in the Constitution says this: the federal government has the power to regulate interstate commerce. What is that? But what does it mean now? Commerce today, if I asked you what commerce means and you were to look it up, basically it means business, right? If you think of commerce, you think of business. If you think of regulate, you think of a regulatory agency, big rule books, all kinds of regulations, right? But here's the deal, in 1787 it didn't mean anything like that. 1787, the word commerce actually meant the shipment of goods. If you had asked Daniel Webster, if you had asked Ben Franklin, they'd have told you to look in Webster's dictionary, and then you'd have looked it up and it would have said, commerce is the shipment of goods. Regulate meant something different too. It meant to regularize, meaning to smooth out and to make simple and easy. There's a reason for that, and it's your fault here in New York. New York and New Jersey were on the verge of a military trade war over tariffs at the time of the convention in 1787, and everybody acknowledged this is ridiculous. We have to give the federal government the power to smooth out the shipment of goods across state lines. In the 1930s, in a case called Willard v. Filburn, the Supreme Court said this: when a farmer grows wheat for his own consumption, that affects interstate commerce because he's not buying wheat on the open market. In other words, not doing business in the open market is doing business in the open market, meaning everything is subject to the Interstate Commerce Clause. The Department of Energy, the Department of Education, the Department of Commerce, the EPA, all authorized under the auspices of these Supreme Court interpretations. Now, I hear a lot of people say this to me when we talk about Convention of States. Mark, here's the deal. If they would just enforce the Constitution, if they would just follow the Constitution that we have, everything would be just fine. Anybody ever hear that? I've said it myself a lot of times. They don't pay attention to the Constitution. But here's the real deal about the Constitution. I said that to Mike Ferris when he brought me this project. And he said, which Constitution are you talking about? I thought that was a really weird question. I only know about one Constitution. He said, no, we have two Constitutions in America. We have the one you can visit in the National Archives under glass. It's beautiful. Everybody should see it. It's really inspiring. You guys might be carrying it around in a pocket Constitution. Easy to understand, compact, well-written, and I think divinely inspired. And then we have the Constitution under which you and I today live. That Constitution, if you want to buy it, you can only get it from the government printing office. It's called the Annotated Constitution. The last full printing was 2,738 pages. It contains all the cases you hate. It contains that Commerce Clause case. It contains the Obergefell marriage decision. It contains Obamacare. That is the Constitution, whether we like it or not, under which we live today. So I don't think they're ever going to fix Washington, D.C. from Washington. But we have the power to do it. And this is extraordinary and untouched. It is an unmined gem in the United States Constitution. I'm going to go way back in history to September 15th, 1787. September 15th, I think, is the most important day in American history, primarily because on September 15th, my lovely wife was born. So I cannot forget September 15th. But also, September 15th, 1787, 2 days before the end of convention, Colonel George Mason stands to address the men assembled. Remember, it's 2 days before the end of convention. They've been there for months. They're tired, it's hot, they're ready to go home. And he stands and addresses the assembly and he says, we have a fundamental problem with the document we've drafted. We've given the power to the federal government to propose amendments should they deem them necessary, but we failed to give that same power to the people acting through their state legislatures. And then he asks a question which to me resonates over 2 centuries later. He asks, are we so naive that we believe that a federal government that becomes a tyranny will propose amendments to restrain its own tyranny? I wish we had video. You guys laughed. I bet you they laughed, right? I mean, it's just ridiculous. Nobody restrains their own tyranny. We have no examples in human history of a government restraining its own tyranny. So he proposes this idea that we ought to give state legislatures the power to call a convention of states to propose amendments specifically to restrain the federal government. You know what the men assembled did? It's an amazing thing because it's really unusual. Madison's notes have these words in it, nin com, which means no comment in Latin. There's no debate. There is no debate. Men who debated everything, who debated what kind of prayer should be said at the meeting, whether they should have a prayer, could they pay a preacher to come? They debated everything. They didn't debate this. And in fact, it was unanimously adopted, one of the few things in the Constitution to give us the power to do this.
Sign the petition at cosaction.com and get as many of your friends and family to do the same. With your full address, your state legislators will know that you really are their constituents in their district. Our success depends on you, so we're inviting you to be part of history. Let's invoke the constitutional solution that's as big as the problem.